Can clean lifters ever be stronger than the ones on PEDs? Powerlifting is one of the rare sports where we can actually answer that, and the answer is yes. In a previous video, I looked at powerlifters who turned to the dark side, those who left tested lifting behind for the untested world. But today, I'm looking at the 8 lifters who never had to. They stayed tested and still became the strongest ever. In fact, in 4 of the 8 men's weight classes, the tested record eclipses the untested. I know some of you are already thinking, are these guys really natural? I hear that all the time, and I'm going to address that question at the end of this video. But first, let's look at the records. So in the 60 kilo class, the untested world record is held by Ramon Vargas at 655.5. He did this in April this year in the WRPF meet, which is an untested federation. Now, it's worth noting that I'm looking at the raw records on the untested side, not the raw with wraps, because tested lifting don't use knee wraps, so making it as level a playing field as possible. And it's also worth noting some other differences that the untested side has, including what you can see there, a deadlift bar. One of the other big differences on the untested side, the fact they don't use a stiff bar and they have 24-hour weigh-ins instead of 2-hour weigh-ins, so the weight cards can be bigger. Not to mention the obvious advantage with, unlimited access to whatever substances you want. Now, on the untested side, the world record in the 59 kilo class is of course held by Sergey Fedosienko. 670.5 is what he did at a meet in March of 2020 at the Russian IPF affiliate Fed. And those are his lifts you can see here. And this is only 1 kilo more than his IPF world record that he did under IPF conditions internationally at Worlds in 2016. Now, I know Fedosienko is a bit controversial to have on this list because, of course, the elephant in the room, he did pop for a doping test back in, I think, 2005, a very long time ago, 7 years before the sport went raw, and he's never popped, he's never failed a test since 2012, so I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt. There's also hardly any information about what he failed for back in 2005. So there's just not enough information for me to exclude him off this list as a true tested natural lifter. He is the most controversial of this list though. The other 7 don't have any controversies attached to them. But going up to the next weight class, 67.5. And the weight classes being slightly different on the untested side. But Michael Estrella took the 67.5 kilo all-time world record. He did that back in August of 2019 at a Boss of Bosses meet where he hit 738. It was a huge untested meet back in the day, the Boss of Bosses. And how's that for a close grip bench? Jesus Christ, you're not going to see many 66s in the IPF benching like that. And this pretty big deadlift as well. Now, notably, there is another, if you look on Open Powerlifting, there is another 67.5 kilo lifter on the untested side who's done more than this. Raymond Phillips supposedly hit 771.1 at a bodyweight of 63.6 in January of 2024. However, I'm not counting him because there's been a lot of controversies around that. He was pretty much an 80 kilo lifter his entire career. And if you look at his meet records, every now and then, a few months after competing at 80 kilos, he'll randomly compete weighing in like the low 60s. I just think something dodgy is going on there. There's literally no video footage, no information I can find about that lift. But the strongest 66 in the world is, of course, Kjell Bakkelund. So we all know what he did in January of this year at Sheffield, 770 kilos. Now again, that Raymond Phillips guy supposedly did a kilo more than that, but the only footage I could find from him was in a meet in October 2023 where he competed at 80 kilos bodyweight and he bombed out on a 290 kilo squat in wraps. And I find it hard to believe that 3 months after that, he managed to cut 16 kilos of bodyweight and squat 276 raw without wraps on his way to totaling 771. So I'm sort of discounting that. Applying some critical judgment here. So Kjell is the strongest 66, murdering that record by Michael Estrella and putting up one of the greatest outlier performances in a record that I think will last for a very long time. However, he's not the only 67.5 kilo lifter who has beaten the untested. Daniel Clements has also achieved this feat. So in September of 2023 at USAPL Raw Nationals, he totaled 745.5. Now, I've spoken about this performance several times before and how crazy impressive and crazy underrated it is, and still is today, because Daniel Clements unfortunately has been injured in the years since. He's not really been able to be back to his best. He has crossed over to Powerlifting America like all the best lifters in the world have. And I look forward to seeing him back at full health hopefully soon, because he is one of only 8 lifters to lay claim to being able to beat the untested world record in his weight class. The next weight class up is the 75s, where the untested world record is held by Keith Correa, who took it in November 2023 at a WRPF meet where he totaled 815. The only footage I could find from this was the deadlift, where he deadlifted 365 over 800 pounds, a massive pull. Again, obviously, deadlift bar being used in untested feds makes a pretty big difference. However, 815 is really nowhere near the strongest tested 75s or 74s in the world. That title belongs to Austin Perkins. So needless to say, we all are familiar with this performance. Austin Perkins, the same meet Daniel Clements did actually, September 2023 USAPL Raw Nationals. He totaled the legendary 851 in the 75 kilo weight class then. He's now crossed over as a 74 into the IPF and has won 2 world titles since his performance. But 851 remains his biggest ever total, and this is significantly above that of the untested side. Absolutely crazy lifts. None of these look like limit lifts either, which is what made the performance even crazier. These all look like pretty comfortable RP8 looking lifts. And while he has bested individual lifts since, he hasn't been able to replicate or beat this total. Although based on his last Worlds performance, I think he's absolutely going to murder this come Sheffield. He's not the only 74 though to be above the untested record. Of course, Taylor Atwood. So Taylor Atwood, in what was equally a legendary performance for his day as Perks 851, totaled 838.5, also at USAPL Nationals in June 2021. And this was absolutely crazy for its time. This took all the formulas in the pound for pound rankings, Wilks, Dots, GL points, everything. And that 340.5 deadlift stood for a very long time as the biggest 74 tested deadlift. Obviously, Keith Correa pulled a lot more on deadlift bar, but Taylor Atwood also out-totaled the untested. There are actually 2 other lifters in this weight class who have done it, both of which are a lot more underrated than Perk and Taylor. Perk and Taylor are the 2 obvious ones. However, Joseph Borenstein also managed to do it. So Joey B in March of 2024 competed at USAPL Arnold Pro in his last 75 kilo meet. This was his last meet before he moved up to the 83s, and of course we all know what he's done in the 83 since, setting the crazy 900 kilo mark and becoming a world champion. But in this last 75 kilo meet that he did, he managed to total 820 kilos, which still stands as the 3rd biggest 74/75 kilo total that there's ever been, behind only Perk and Taylor. And again, this is a pretty underrated performance from Joey B, because it was only a few months after this that he moved up to the 83s and totaled 865 to set the unofficial world record. And then of course, what he's done since with the 900 and his world's victory. But 820 kilos, he can also be one of the 8 lifters who can claim to have out-totaled the untested. And another 74 who can claim to this is Ilya Marichev. Now this is a meet that happened very recently. In fact, this was only June of this year, a few weeks ago at Russian Nationals, I think it was. Ilya Marichev also totaled 820. Now this still hasn't made its way onto Open Powerlifting, but I had Ilya himself comment on one of my previous videos saying that he had done this. I think it was the video where I was talking about the 11 times bodyweight totals, because with this performance he also totaled 11 times bodyweight. So I'm not going to forget you this time, Ilya. You did make the cut in the video, despite Open Powerlifting not being updated yet. But yeah, 820 kilos ties Joey B for the 3rd biggest 74/75 tested total, and indeed the 3rd biggest 74/75 total period, right? Because it's still heavier than that of the untested. Ilya Marichev is also competing again soon at the IPF World University Cup, which is in, what, like a few weeks now, or 2 or so weeks. So I'm very curious to see what he can put up and if he can try close that gap further towards Perk's world record. And the 4th and final weight class where the tested lifter can claim to be stronger than the untested is the biggest weight class, which is the 140 plus, as it's known on the untested side, or the 120 plus on the IPF. But the untested world record was held by Dan Bell. So Dan Bell in February of 2020 at an RPS meet totaled his 1127.5. This was the biggest raw total in sleeves, beating Ray Williams's mark at the time, who before that could also claim to have beaten the untested. Dan Bell also held the record for the biggest total raw with wraps as well, with 1182.5 in 2021 that he did, and that stood for a few years until Colton Engelbrecht broke that with his legendary 1200 recently. But this stood as the biggest raw total by any powerlifter in any weight class for pretty much 5 years until it was broken by a tested IPF lifter. So the previous 3 weight classes we looked at were the lightest 3 weight classes, which kind of makes sense because, you know, most of the untested guys are going to be heavier than 75, 67.5, and definitely 60 kilos. But in the open category 140 plus, the strongest man is also tested, and that is, of course, Jesus Olivares. So Jesus put up his legendary Sheffield performance 2023, the inaugural Sheffield March of that year. He walked away as the inaugural Sheffield champion, totaling 1152.5, squatting over 1,000, benching 600, deadlifting over 900. This was about as perfect a powerlifting performance as you can get. And in doing so, he managed to beat Dan Bell's record by 25 kilos. Jesus still has not been able to best this performance since. He's been stuck around the high thousands, low 1100s, but hopefully we see him back to the mid 1100s and pushing closer towards the 1200, like some of his previous training has suggested that he could get to. Now, I can already guess what a lot of you are probably thinking, that there's no way these guys are actually natural. I mean, it's a fair question, but it's one that I've already tackled in depth in this other video that I've done right here. So if you want to hear my arguments for why the best tested lifters, including the ones in this video, really are clean, then click here. I'll also leave a link to it in the description. I'll lay out some facts and my arguments, and you can decide for yourself. If you want to see me continue this series, maybe looking at the women's side or exploring how close some of the tested lifters are in the other weight classes, let me know in the comments below.